What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Toma Todito Show. And with this weekend as big as it was for boxing, the attention went to Gervonta Davis stopping Mario Barrios, giving Barrios his first defeat of his career, taking Barrios' WBA regular version of the title away from him in a nearly packed arena out in Atlanta, Georgia. Showtime stole most of the attention. And on the other side of the country, Lomachenko's performance against Nakatani stole the other half of the attention of the boxing world, or from the boxing world, as he was out in Las Vegas and put on a masterful performance in his first fight back since he surrendered his titles to Teofimo Lopez. The attention was there, and it's quite likely that there's two fights, at least two names that you may have overlooked that actually fought this past weekend. One of them fought in the earlier hours before the Loma and the Davis fights kicked off, or those cards kicked off. And that person is Julio Cesar Martinez, El Rey. He fought in Guadalajara against Joel Cordova. He defended his title. He had many setbacks. He was due to come back earlier this year. He was due to actually come back prior to the closing of 2020. And he experienced such setbacks as injuries and illnesses and what have you. And it was evident by the time that he stepped onto the ring and the bell rung. It was pretty evident that he had been out of the ring for quite a while. He stepped into the ring as the WBC champ. He stepped into the ring as the first fighter to put the promotional company that Canelo Alvarez has now launched, Julio Cesar Martinez, or as people know him, Rey Martinez, King. This is the first fighter that Canelo Alvarez signed to his promotional company. So he has the promotion of the pound-for-pound champ on his shoulders. As if it wasn't enough pressure, he has a title to defend. As if it wasn't enough pressure, he was off his game a little bit. But the true champ that he is, he found his way. It was an interesting fight that he had against Cordova, because Cordova knows him. Cordova and Martinez have sparred numerous rounds in the past. They know each other fairly well. And it was evident when they were fighting against one another that Cordova has certain answers for Martinez and posed a certain threat to Martinez because he knew him. The other part of the puzzle was that Martinez, if the fighters, there's a portion of fighters that believe in ring rust, and there's a certain amount of fighters that do not. It was evident something was off with Martinez when the fight kicked off. His spacing was off, his rhythm was off, his punches were off. He was lunging forward with his left hand, where he would often catch himself off balance. He would end up bouncing on the ball of his left foot to save himself from continuing to lose his balance. He was off balance quite often. He was off base. And this happened for the first 2 to 3 rounds. The exchanges that they had, he was so looking forward. He was throwing everything with bad intentions, which he normally does, but he normally fights a little bit more calculated and a little bit more composed. He lets the fighters bring the fight to him. And when he knows that the fighters are bringing, his opponents are bringing the fight to him, he engages with them. He meets them halfway, encouraging a head-on collision, not a head clash, but encouraging the collision, and usually being the one that turns out to be successful by way of his combinations and his power. This was supposed to be the case. He tried to go into that pace as if he tried to jump into where he left off, and he noticed right away that he was off. When his rhythm was off, it allowed Cordova to breathe some fresh air and some fire and start bringing the fight to Martinez. It took him several rounds to find his base, to get grounded and start fighting his fight. The fight ended in the 6th round as the referee deemed the stoppage. Rey Martinez pummeled Cordova, which led to the referee stepping in and waving off the fight. He found his stride, and he performed fairly well. From the 4th round on, maybe even the second half of the 3rd to the 6th, I could give him. But he was definitely off, and you knew something was off. The months of inactivity affected him. Those are all the negatives that I'm pointing out. Those are all the negatives. I love this kid. I love watching this kid. I love his approach to the game. I love how humble he is. Those are all the negatives that I'm pointing out. And obviously, we know, because I just told you, he knocks out his opponent. He basically stops. He TKOs his opponent in the 6th round, meaning the power is still there. He found his stride. He composed himself. He gathered himself, listened to the corner, and put his opponent away. El Rey Martinez is back, and he looks good. More than likely, this is a fight that you overlooked this past weekend because all the attention was over on Tank versus Barrios, Loma versus Nakatani, Erickson Lubin. For those that are following closely the division as it's unfolding in the 154-pound division, right? Jermell Charlo Castaño about to unify all titles. Erickson Lubin and Jason Rosario were there not too long ago. Jason Rosario had a title. He ended up losing that to Jermell Charlo when he unified or attempted to unify. So for those of you following the 154-pound division, that's always been a fun division for me. And that's a division that I used to follow back in the day when Vernon Forrest was there, when De La Hoya was there, Ricardo Mayorga. It's always been a fun division. Canelo was there at one point. Mosley ended up making it up there. Kirkland. I mean, you name it. These are the fighters that were there. Sergio Martinez at one point was there. Paul Williams. So that's a division that I used to love to follow. And then it got a little light as far as competition was concerned. And then all the attention started shifting towards one division north of there at 160. So that's that. That's where the attention was going. More than likely, you overlooked this, and it was the Zone ended up broadcasting this earlier in the day out of Guadalajara. Not a lot of big names, a lot of journeymen, a lot of prospects, a lot of up-and-coming fighters that took place in that card. A lot of people finding their positioning within their divisions. But the one man that was there was the guy that is carrying the Canelo Promotions on his shoulders for Canelo, and that's Julio Cesar Martinez, he's the champ. He's got one defeat. And if you want to know who he lost that fight to, it doesn't matter. All you need to know is that he lost his first fight, the first fight of his professional career. And since then, he's been on a tear, and he's getting better and better and better. I had a chance to meet him out in Phoenix, Arizona back in 2019. He fought on the undercard of the Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., Danny Jacobs, and I attended that event. And I had a chance to meet him. I got a picture that I was able to take with him. And the kid was very humble. His team was very humble. The kid was very humble that he was even recognized. I remember he was walking through the hotel, and they had a Mexican flag, and they're waving it, and most of the people were just looking at him, like watching him. So I approached him, and he was very humble that somebody recognized him, and his team was as well very gracious. And I got to take a picture with him. I got to talk to him for a few minutes, and it was awesome. Great kid. I can't wait to see him back in the ring. And I was excited that he finally came back after so many delays. He's probably experienced about 6 to 7 months of delays, and good to see him be back in the ring, find his stride. But what popped in my head was the fact of the ring rust. That argument has been long. It's been an age-long discussion, right? Some fighters believe in it, some fighters don't, some fighters agree with it, some fighters don't, some fighters have experienced it or claim to have experienced it, others don't. Some fighters deny it, yet the fans are watching them and they're like, this guy's not on top of his game, he's off. And it's probably because he hasn't fought since 2 years ago or whatever it is. This is what I noticed. Julio Cesar Martinez looked off. And if you go back and watch that fight, if you didn't watch that fight because you were so focused on the other fights that were taking place that day, go back and watch it. You'll even catch it on YouTube, at least the highlights. But the DAZN highlights on YouTube are amazing because they're usually lengthy. They're usually putting highlights that are 20 to 30 minutes long, so you get a good idea of what happened in these fights if you didn't get to watch the fight. I would never tell you to base your opinion based on highlights, which is what we keep seeing. Why and what you constantly hear me argue here on this on the show, where people seem to base their opinions based on a headline that they read on whatever website they come across or newspaper headline, if they even read newspapers nowadays. But they'll come across a website and they read a headline, so-and-so wins dominant decision, or so-and-so wins by unanimous decision. And so they look at that, they look at the scorecards, and they base that, or they end up expressing their opinions, formulating their opinions based on what they read and what they took them 2 seconds to read. But when you watch certain fights, even though it's a unanimous decision or a split decision win for the person who was a favorite in the fight, it doesn't always mean that the fight actually played out that way. And the most recent example I could give you is Jermall Charlo and Macias. Jermall Charlo outpointed Macias. He was winning these rounds. But the fight was not playing out as one-sided as the scores read at the end of the fight or as the headlines printed the day after. Hence, look at Jermall Charlo's eye. His right eye was nearly shut. He stumbled and was staggered in the late rounds by a zombie in Macias who wouldn't stop coming forward. So the scorecards, the headlines could tell you one thing until you watch the fight and you formulate your own opinion on what took place. Don't throw it out there. Don't offer it, because it's most likely going to be flawed. Watch the fight. Do your due diligence. Watch these fights. Watch them a second time. Figure out angles. Study these things. Just like fighters are transitioning from good to great, That's my goal, to transition from a casual fan to an educated, a better educated fan of the sport. An aficionado, a true aficionado of the sport. And maybe one day, who knows, if the platform continues to grow, as it continues to grow, then I'll be able to have these types of discussions and my points of views, exchange my points of views and my opinions with the ones who are considered to be the who's of commentating in the sport of boxing. But we all know that when you watch these fights, you see these comments and the constant complaints of, what the hell is that guy doing there commentating on this? Why is that guy even part of the team? And you hear this all the time. The biasness, the this, the that. You hear it all the time. And a lot of it is true. A lot of it is biased on behalf of the person that's pointing the finger. And maybe that guy is right, or gal who's commenting. They may be right in what they're saying and what they're expressing, but because you don't give yourself a shot to study the sport, yet you love the sport, you're doing yourself a disservice. Something else that you guys hear me complain about over and over is the judges. Over and over we see these judges cards that you see a great fight between two men who leave it all out in the ring or out in the octagon, because every so often I'll cover UFC as well, or Bellator or MMA in its entirety, right? To not throw brands out there. And you'll hear me complain or whine about these scorecards because they're completely ridiculous and absurd sometimes, that you have a landslide score for a fight that you as a viewer sees a lot closer than what the scores display. You're looking at the fighters' faces, completely marked up, bloodied, yet you see a 98-91 score or 110 to whatever. Like, it's crazy sometimes. Who the hell are these judges that do that and continue to get fights and continue to be allowed by these sanctioning bodies and these commissions to judge these fights, these high-priced fights? This is not something that I take lightly, because this is something that's affecting people's livelihoods. These guys are in there leaving it all. They get away from their families. They stop working. Some of them, like Joe Smith Jr., right, works and trains. The blue-collar boxer. He's still a throwback to the boxers of old. Works in construction, trains, and is a hell of a fighter and a champ at that. Hell, he knocked Bernard Hopkins through the ropes and onto the floor. Yet you'll see these judges with landslide scores. It's BS when you see that. So I'm going to bring this back into the second part of the episode that I was going to get into. Because we're talking about the fights that you most likely overlooked, with the attention going to Gervonta Davis and his stoppage over Mario Barrios, the amazing return and performance that Lomachenko put together over Japanese fighter Nakatani, in a top rank promoted episode. The fight that you overlooked on Saturday was DAZN's early showing of Julio Cesar Martinez, who also returned after a long layoff and was successful in stopping Cordova in the 6th round. That retains his title and did justice to Canelo's boxing promotion as the original acquiree or signee. We move on to Sunday. Yep, Sunday. You're accustomed to seeing boxing on Saturday or main events on Saturday. Guess what? The PBC puts on shows on Sundays every so often. And they just so happen to put on a hell of a show on Sunday, thanks to PBC and Fox Sports. They put on a hell of a show where you saw Cuban prospect and newly crowned champion, the PBC's own version of Lomachenko, or who they're hoping to be their version of Lomachenko, Al Heyman's version of Lomachenko. Bob Arum has Loma. Al Heyman wanted his own Loma. And it looks like he has him so far. Loma got crowned as a champ early in his career. David Morrell Jr. campaigns in the 168-pound division. Yep. The same division as Canelo Alvarez, the pound-for-pound fighter. The same division as Billy Joe Saunders, should he return. The same division as David Benavidez. The same division as the other prospect who's making a name for himself out of Puerto Rico, Edgar Berlanga. If you haven't seen or heard of David Morrell, he's a hell of a fighter. If I remember correctly, his amateur record is listed as something to the likes of 135 and 2 losses. Or maybe I have it backwards and it may be 132 to 5 losses. I'll look it up here as I'm talking to you guys. But the amateur record's impressive. And he was in action on Sunday as a headlining event for the PBC against Mario Casares. Now, you may not recognize who Mario Casares is. Maybe not right off the bat, but the last fight that Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. had before his debacle against Anderson Silva, his most recent debacle, he faced Mario Casares when he was planning on getting back on track, getting back into title contention, and he was going to take this serious, and he was going to start heading back towards a road, find a road against Golovkin or Canelo. Well, that's who Mario Casares is. After Mario Casares defeated Chavez Jr., he went on numerous interviews, numerous talks, offering his opinion, and he said something to the sorts of he would basically destroy Canelo and anybody else out there. Anybody who's a top dog at 168, he would do away with them. If anybody believed them, then you're the fool. Mario Casares is a fighter that comes forward, is a fighter that has a decent punch, decent pop behind his punch, but he's nothing special. He's not your elite type Mexican fighter. He doesn't possess a Juan Manuel Marquez type mind. He doesn't possess a Canelo style or that ring IQ. He doesn't possess anything special. He just looked good against a Chavez Jr. And he was going to be a threat to Mario Casares. Now, or to David Morrell. If you don't remember this, on one of the previous episodes, I was actually previewing this fight that David Morrell was going to have. David Morrell, who's a very live dog, or starting to become a live dog in this 168-pound division that Canelo's running. David Morrell had a fight against English fighter John Ryder, scheduled for earlier in June. That fight didn't materialize. If you recall, during the Canelo event against Billy Joe Saunders, John Ryder was going to be attending that event should Billy Joe Saunders decide to pull out over his ring size dispute. John Ryder, there was speculation that he showed up and he was in attendance in case he had to step in last minute against Canelo. And he would have been ready because he was already in camp preparing for David Morrell. OSVARY, David Morrell. Cuban fighter, Cuban prospect. I just looked it up, and if you heard me pausing a little bit, it's because I was trying to look this up for you. So I was wrong on both of those numbers that I read to you. It's listed, his amateur career is reported as 130 wins to 2 defeats. I was off by a couple victories. I was awarding him a couple extra victories there. Nonetheless, that tells me, and it tells you, that his pedigree of boxing is very good. Now, to date, it hasn't displayed that way. It hasn't played out that way. He looks limited. He looks like he's learning. He looks like he's coming into his own. He does possess power. He does have speed. He's rangy. He's long. He still has a lot of work. He still has a long way to go before he starts taking over or being a top dog in the 168-pound division. Even though he says that he's ready for the big names, that I translate that as to what most fighters are trying to do nowadays, and that meaning that they're ready for the payday, they're ready for the money, but they're not ready for the big times yet. I don't think he could handle David Benavidez. I don't think he could handle Plant. I don't think he could handle Billy Joe Saunders. I don't think he could handle a David Lemieux. But a fight with him and Edgar Berlanga would be very entertaining. He recently destroyed Mike Gravonsky. Who's Mike Gravonsky? I don't know. I had never heard of him before that fight. But he stopped him in round 3. He won the interim version to the WBA title against Lennox Allen in a unanimous decision win in his 3rd outing. So he fights Mario Casares. He defends his title. He defends his WBA version of the title. Of course, the man in that division is none other than Canelo Alvarez. This is a similar mention as to that of what's happening in the 140-pound division with Josh Taylor being the man. Canelo's still missing a title. He's still missing Caleb Plant's title, of course. But he's basically unified this division with the exception of Plant's title. Josh Taylor has all the titles at 140. And Gervonta Davis just picked up a version of the WBA title because the WBA has 10 titles for each division. Well, they have 4, I believe, to each division, but this is a version of title that David Morrell has, and this is what Al Heyman and the PBC are banking on, that they have their version of a Lomachenko, a good boxer with a good amateur record, high pedigree, who wins a title early in his career and is going to get into these big fights. He's a talented guy. He possesses a lot of hope and a lot of promise. And when he faced Mario Casares, who ran his mouth after defeating Chavez Jr., saying that he belonged in the ring with Canelo, that they were scared to face him, and blah, 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 and this and that, and all these other fighters, that he could be in the top echelon of the 168-pound division, he came into the ring with that swagger. He came into the ring with that approach, and he fights that way. He's not a dirty fighter. He's just a confrontational fighter. He makes these fights into dirty style fights because he's very confrontational. He's rough. He likes to make these fights into rough phone booth style fights, and anything goes with Mario Casares. This is the new version of David Morrell, or a new side to David Morrell, that I was able to see this past Sunday, because Mario Casares takes the fight to him, headbutts him at one point, where you visibly see, it's very visible that you could see David Morrell's, very obvious, I guess I should say, that you see the damage that David Morrell took to his head, as his head is just red. It's marked because Mario Casares head clashes with him. He hits hard, he pushes forward, he presses the action, and he brings it to every single one of the fighters. But if the fighter across the ring from him is able to defend himself by utilizing boxing, angles, and movement, Mario Casares is in trouble. He pushed his luck against David Morrell, pissed him off. David Morrell came after him, knocked him out. Stiff. All this happened in the first round. So if your attention was focused on Gervonta and Barrios, Loma Nakatani, as it rightfully should be, go check REY Martinez's fight against Cordova and check out David Morrell's destruction of Mario Casares. All that crap that Casares talked about getting in there against Canelo and this and that and blah, blah, blah is finally laid to rest thanks to David Morrell, who is a very good prospect, I guess I shouldn't even say prospect because he's a champion. He holds a version of the WBA title now, but he's a very good up-and-coming fighter who improved this record to 5-0 now, who has a decent pedigree by way of Cuban boxing, Cuban amateur boxing, and we know that Cuban amateurs are some of the best boxers around the world, or in the world. David Morrell is one of them. Erislandi Lara is another one that comes to mind. Guillermo Rigondeaux is another one that comes to mind. David Morrell's a different style fighter than those two. But the record's there. It's reported 130-2, 130 wins to 2 losses. He has a title. He's 5-0. He's tall. He's rangy. He's a good-looking boxer. Very marketable. Once as he continues to pile up these wins, good power. Good speed. Puts his punches very well, puts them together very well. His footwork lacks a little work. His defense lacks a little work. But he'll be there. And I think in a couple fights, by his 6th or 7th win, maybe even by his 10th win, I don't think it should take him that long, but maybe give him 1 or 2 more fights. And I would love to see him against Edgar Berlanga. Edgar Berlanga, although he was a big knockout artist, up to a certain extent of his career, for the first 16 fights of his career, people were overlooking his boxing. He has very good boxing himself. David Morrell is someone that you need to get to know because we're running out of names. Callum Smith, who lost to Canelo, is going to be moving up to 175 as it's being reported. Caleb Plant and Benavidez and all the other PBC fighters seem to want to be fighting against one another because the planned Canelo fight still hasn't been signed. You got Canelo out on his own, just running amok on everybody and just taking over everybody. Danny Jacobs is out there campaigning at 160, 168. Everybody's calling out Canelo, but nobody wants to fight him. Everybody says they could beat him. Nobody wants to fight him. And the fighters that do fight him end up getting dismantled by Canelo. At least the fighters that end up making it to all the way to the end of the contract signing, because it seems like these are long processes, and the Canelo plant contractual negotiations seem to be at a standstill. It should have been signed, should have been done, should have been announced. It's not happening yet, and it may not happen. Nonetheless, listen, the fights continue to happen. And David Morrell, somebody that you need to keep an eye on. And Julio Cesar Martinez is most likely going to be fighting McWilliams Arroyo, who has the interim version to his WBC title. David Morrell, who has his WBA version of the title, is obviously looking to unify against Canelo, but that's not going to happen. So keep an eye out for him, because he may very well be fighting another one of the bigger names, or names that you may recognize. David Morrell against David Lemieux would be an entertaining fight for me. I think David Lemieux would be too much for him, but I guess we'll see. That's the test that he needs. So keep an eye out for David Morrell. Impressive victory, impressive knockout that he put together of Mario Casares. So go check that out if you missed that. That's everything that happened this past weekend. So with that, I leave you guys. Take care of yourselves. Another lengthy episode for you guys, but a lot to cover, a lot to think about, a lot to digest, right? So thank you guys again. Thank you guys for all the love. The platform continues to grow. I've been seeing some comments on the YouTube channel. I'm a little behind on those, as I had a birthday weekend and then a 4th of July weekend. And so I took some long weekends there to enjoy with family. And so I fell behind on the episode, but it was for a good reason, right? Family comes first, blood comes first, and everything else is secondary. So I know you guys live by that motto. And if you don't, you need to start applying that. Family always comes first. And so I've been living that way the last couple of weeks. With that said, listen, this is my passion. You guys are my passion. You guys keep following me. You guys are commenting now on the YouTube channel. You guys are commenting on my Twitter now and interacting with me. You guys are following my stuff on Instagram as I continue to post content on there. All the episode previews are on there, and you could link directly to the podcast. And of course, as you guys know, time and time again, and if this is the first time you're tuning in, you could find me on any of the major platforms. Any of the major podcast platforms available out there, whether it's Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, you name it, Deezer, you name it. There's so many out there. You could find me on any and all of them. YouTube, I try to upload the catalog up there as well. I've done a very good job. We've done a very good job, I should say. I'm not taking credit for that. My team has done a very good job in uploading and keeping track with that catalog, although we're behind maybe a couple episodes. But other than that, listen, guys, you guys keep showing me love. I'm going to keep bringing content. Of course, I need to take some breathers sometime because of life in general, just like we all do. But I'm here for you guys. I love you guys. Thank you for the loyalty, and I give it right back to you. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. I'm about to finish the last bit of whiskey that I have here. Salud. Whatever you may find yourself. Salud. Cheers. Much love. Peace out. Have a good night.